Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agte and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Hi, my name is Aaron Agte. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today. And thanks everybody for listening and watching.
Great to be here as well. We're continuing on our experiment with YouTube and video. So, not that long ago, Trishul asked me if I had used ChatGPT or the AI service, and I've heard of it, like people trying to use AI to create different stories. And one of the stories I'm going to share is funny, but that's later. And as Trishul was trying to tell me how this is going to change the world, I was initially skeptic and starting to disagree with him. And we realized we need to start recording this part of the conversation. So we're going to see, we kind of paused our conversation. We don't know where it's going to go today. But Trishul, why don't you start off with explaining ChatGPT, a little bit AI, what you heard about it and what you've tried to do so far.
Okay, so I've been a fan of AI for quite some time. I did a master's in computer science about 20 years ago to the dot. And my concentration was in artificial intelligence. So this was a time when you could do AI, meaning you could learn about it and you could think about it and you could take exams about it, but it was nowhere near the type of technology we're talking about today. It was basically a largely academic exercise where we would think about the methodology of some sort of algorithm learning and adapting over time and, having some sort of feedback where it can start to figure out things, right? A simple example that we learned in the class was, what if there was a problem that you were presented with and you had to devise an algorithm that could figure out the answer? And the tricky part about the problem is it's not fully deterministic, like what's 2 + 2. It might be, what is the average expected value, or what is the expected value that is of this dice, but you don't know if it's a fair dice or not, something like that. And how would you figure it out? How would you write a program that would figure it out? And the way it might work is you build something like a neural network. And the idea there is you have this algorithm, this network. It starts off with some initial conditions, like I think the expected value is 3. Right? If you roll the dice, on average, you'll get a 3. What that means is, for example, if you roll a 1, that's a 1. If you get a 6, the next time, that's a 6. The average of 1 and 6 is 7. Divided by 2 is 3.5, right? So that's maybe what you might expect with a fair dice compared to a non-fair dice. Let's say it might be 3. So how would you tell that and build an algorithm to decide that? Okay, so you set up this neural network where you roll the dice and then you tell the computer what the answer is. And what the computer will do is it will use that answer to update its internal understanding of what's going on with this dice. And then it'll tell you what it best thinks it is. And over time, it'll keep updating and hopefully it'll gravitate towards the right answer. Now, again, this is very simple because, we can work this out mathematically by just rolling many times and taking an average. But you can start applying this to more complicated things where you're trying to figure out things that are a bit more fuzzy and evolving. And you can imagine how these types of algorithms can become more predictive and more understanding of what's happening in a fuzzy world. So, okay. Yeah, that and things have come a long way. For example, I've had the opportunity to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to build financial models and algorithms. And the idea there is when you're dealing with financial prediction, the world is always changing. So you can't come up with a static model and say, this is a regression that tells us how the world is going to behave, right? Because the world's going to change. But if you build a model that can be adaptive, meaning the regression model adapts based upon what's going on, and it comes up with different predictions based upon what's happened in near history, then you can hopefully do a little bit better than something that's kind of set in stone. So, that's one phase of it. But then there's this whole other level of machine learning and modeling where you come up with a type of algorithm that's more generalized to a situation, meaning you ask it very general things and it starts to come up with answers that are hopefully impactful and relevant. And I think that's kind of the era we're entering in now, where you're seeing this generalized type of intelligence coming to face.
So it sounds a little bit like as we get to the generalized side, like the finance side, I can guess there's enough specific numeric inputs that you have like quantifiable data. But it sounds like for the generalized, where this is a second step of like Google predicting what your search is. So as you start typing, it's trying to like pre-fill or autofill what the search is based on what everyone else has been searching. And the more information you put, like that starts to narrow in, oh yeah, that's the exact question I'm trying to ask. And then it'll also provide all the results based on kind of how all the other websites link to each other. And like, oh, everyone seems to be pointing to this one website. That must be an authority website. So we're going to reference that and show that first. So it sounds like this is the next level of that, of being able to ask general questions, and the machines can interpret the general question by what most people mean when they ask that question, what the results that they're looking for when they ask that question, and then start to try to generate its own answer to what it interprets as that specific question.
It's also a little bit different under the covers. For example, we've heard of like the initial machine learning algorithms that were put forward for chess, right? The big blue and the models there to come up with these types of horsepower driven machines, but still using different forms of artificial intelligence to play chess, right? And initially, a large part of the learning was very specialized because you had to program in the exact rules of the game and exact strategies and different things like that. But now you might have a different form of a more generalized type of learning, just saying, here's a game and here are the rough rules, and set two bots against each other and just start playing and see what happens, right?
Okay.
And let the bot figure out what it means to have a good strategy. And over time, it starts building up this intuition that will far surpass, or still does far surpass, what humans can do.
Okay. So when I open my chess.com app and it gives me like a probability of winning this game, it's kind of like, based on this position, here's the thousands of games that have been played, and here's where we think this position will end up. And so it'll interpret my moves of, you moved from a bad position to a good position, or more likely my mistakes are, you were in a good position, but you made a mistake that you're now in a bad position.
Yeah, so chess is an interesting one because in theory, not exactly, but in theory, it's fully deterministic, right? There you can solve any single formation to the very, very end, and you can come up with a solution. But in practice, it's very hard because there's just so many different permutations that it would take, obviously, a human an impossible amount of time, and a computer a close to an impossible amount of time. So both the computer and the human can do a couple things. They can memorize, like you just said, what happens in this specific situation. Or with humans, we start to build up an intuition. Like, I've seen something that's similar to this type of configuration, and I've had this notion, even though I'm not calculating, too far down on all the different paths. I can drop off, 90% of the things I might think about, focus on these three, and then zero in on the one I want to make. And it's this different type of thinking rather than horsepower oriented or brute force thinking, right? That computers are starting to apply beyond obviously what humans can even think of doing.
That's actually a really good way to phrase it, because like, you can eliminate, well, if I move this, they're going to take it. I have no recourse. I move this, they're going to take it. I don't have no recourse. Like, and so like, even if you just play out 2 moves for every piece on the board, you can probably eliminate all but 2 or 3 potential moves.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think that's probably what he's talking about. That intuition is like, I'm not going to move this pawn to have it taken. I'm not going to move my queen till it just gets taken. So like you start to eliminate a lot of things very quickly and then focus on the 2 or 3 potentials. So I can see that's probably like trying to explain what the intuition that I feel when I'm playing. That does make sense.
Right. And you, yeah.
Subconsciously rejecting possible moves before like actually considering them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the greatest chess players that they feel this type of intuition because they just played so much. It's like you said, it can be somewhat subconscious. Their brains have built up this internal network of understanding that that we call intuition.
Okay, so you're saying machines are by kind of defining our intuition, machine learning and AI can then develop their own intuition.
Right. So we've maybe heard the next level of chess, like the Go, right? AlphaGo. If you've heard a little bit about that, and the notion with Go is if chess is a hard problem, then Go is an impossible problem, just because there's an exponentially more amount of different permutations and things to prune. And it was once believed that computers wouldn't ever be able to develop that type of intuition to be excellent at something like this, because it's just that much more hard to do. The news story is, well, we've already done it. We've passed that. That's kind of old news. So this was news, I guess, a year or two ago, that Go has now been surpassed with computers and AI to the point where no human will probably ever catch up.
Okay. So I think that's a good explanation of how machine learning and AI got to where we are now. But like, tell me more about the ChatGPT and the writing part.
Right. So, I've heard snippets of AI being used in other spaces, like, the next level from AlphaGo was the protein folding problem. Has that come across
That one I do not know.
Okay. So when you have a protein, which is a long chain or sequence of amino acids that are tied together, the building block for like muscles and other types of complex tissues within our bodies, one of the deep problems with proteins is, even though you know the exact sequence of the proteins, you have no idea how the protein bundles up and forms whatever structure it needs to form. And it turns out the structure that it forms means a lot more than the actual components of the sequence.
Okay.
So the 3D structure that it forms can be very important to understand, because it tells us, how is this protein going to interact with this hormone, and how is it going to gel within the body and things like that, right?
Okay.
And so understanding how a protein will fold up is very important, and we have some ways of figuring this out. Essentially, what somebody had to do before this type of technology was put forward is they would spend their entire PhD career figuring out how one single protein may fold up. And they have to analyze it through all these various complex scientific processes that are very slow and mechanical, essentially. You have to do a lot of trial and error and whatnot. So yeah, protein folding was a problem that was considered almost impossible to figure out. Well, at this point, it's old news as well. So it turns out that the team that put forward the AlphaGo, came up with a protein folding algorithm using AI that can basically figure out how any single protein is going to fold with a very high degree of accuracy. So it's one of the things that is now pretty much solved. And the advancement to medicine for having that in our back pocket is tremendous. It's something that we're going to see the results of that play out through new technologies in biomedicine and other types of, just whatever relies on this type of information.
Okay. So again, how are we getting back to ChatGPT?
Okay, so now the technology that was used for the protein folding, we're getting more and more general in the understanding of how to process large amounts of information and come up with something useful.
I see. So it's no longer defined rules of a chess or Go game. It's undefined structure. And so like we're both learning the structure and the results.
Right. So it's solving things that are thought to be very uncompetent or computationally unbound, like just huge amount of horsepower would need it, but it's just almost impossible if you try to go down that route. It's just nonsensical. So now these types of problems, to come closer to the ChatGPT, I saw one space where they set up an AI to slurp in all of the scientific papers relating to medicine and the latest research for biology and things like that, and it started to come up with predictions that were in line with what we would expect from a medical professional.
Okay.
And yeah, the notion here is, let's say you are a newly minted physician who's gone through all of the research and the academic understanding of what it takes to be a medical doctor in practice these days. Well, in a couple of years, there's going to be hundreds of papers that you haven't even thought about, out there, and you can't possibly keep up with everything. Well, the idea here is a AI robot can actually read all of that in real time and parse it together, and maybe even draw insights that it could take a human devoting their entire career to kind of figure out. So that's just one example that's very close to what I'm about to mention with ChatGPT.
So it sounds like, I think if you're trying to explain, there was an aphorism like, to understand infinity, if you had an infinite number of monkeys typing on an infinite number of typewriters for an infinite amount of time, eventually you'd produce the works of Shakespeare. Where it's like, it's just, you give enough time, energy, and situations of randomness, and you'll like just happen to come across like a version that has one word wrong, and then an infinite number of years later, you'll have a version that's actually correct. And that's what the old way of computing was thinking, was just having to kind of brute force over enough iterations. But now you're saying machine learning is not using randomness to start. It's reading all the works of Shakespeare, and then can you write a new Shakespearean play based on the style of that?
Right. So, in the past, for example, the humans would do the heavy lifting on the intuition to cut down the problem to something that's tractable. And they would save the computers for the last mile, like do the grammar check, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Let's start with legal English words. Let's start with the dictionary. So instead of like just random letters, you can only use random words.
So it's a big leg up, right? And the notion now is, instead of starting with something that's written and finishing it the last mile, you can tell the AI robot to just write it from the beginning. And this is what ChatGPT is about. It's a form of generalized AI that you can communicate with, and it'll respond back with something based upon current human understanding that is quite sensible.
So when you first mentioned this, I don't know if you have seen the Hallmark Christmas movie version. I pulled this up. It was a tweet from 2018. So this is 4 years ago. Almost a little over 4 years ago now. But it's December 2018. And it was someone who said he forced a bot to watch 1,000 hours of Hallmark Christmas movies. Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't.
I'll put the link in because it's hilarious. But it starts off, this is the title, The Christmas on Christmas. Enter small town snow globe refillery. We see a single mother refilling snow globes with Christmas juice. She is widow. Her husband died in every war. And like it goes on like this, and like when you're reading this, it gets funnier and funnier because it's like it's intentionally like it's obviously wrong, but it's like just close enough that you like understand the context. And when you first mentioned ChatGPT, this is what I thought of like something from 4 years ago that is just wrong. And
Right.
I've tried different AI transcription services. And so I currently use Grain to record my Zoom videos and gives me a real-time transcriptions. And the first time I used Grain, I was testing it out, and someone asked like, "What's this thing recording me using Grain?" And I read, "Oh, it's Grain. It helps you get a transcription." I go read the transcript, and it says brain. So like the service itself got its own name wrong.
Right.
And so when you first brought this up, that was my first thought. It's like, maybe we'll get there eventually, but my intuition, but that's like probably the wrong way to phrase it. It's like it still feels wrong. And so that's why I want to kind of you to help clarify, like, am I just a couple years out of date when it comes to this kind of technology?
That might be true. I've used some of these little chat bots over the years, and I wasn't impressed too much in the past, but I started to hear more buzz about it in the near future, in the last, call it 3 to 6 months. And what kind of turned my eye is I came across a post a few weeks ago, and this was like, before the holiday or around December, before Christmas. And this guy put something up saying, I let ChatGPT design my whole holiday feast, and it came up with a perfect, 6-course meal that I was able to execute. And it turned out to be a grand success, the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got me thinking, I had never thought of that. Like, asking an AI chatbot plan out an event for me, and then following the steps that it laid out and seeing what happens. But it turns out it can do something like that. It can do that and a lot more once I started looking into what was going on. And I was trying it out. Of course, you can. We'll leave the link to ChatGPT, and you can try it out yourself. But it turns out it can do that and far more.
Okay, so whether or not we're there, I don't think it's kind of what we were at. Like when you first saw this, and let's say it is good, where like I'd say I feel like the definition of good in a sense is it becomes indistinguishable from another human that you haven't met. So like most of what I've seen, like when you do go to a website and like we're here to help you, you can tell it's a chat bot trying to predict your answers. It has a limited number of responses, and so it's like you can tell the difference between a human and an AI bot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. Like even if we might be there now, but even if we're not that far from being able to tell the difference between an AI machine and a stranger. And so what were your first thoughts of the implications of that?
Right. We should probably put a notable mention to the Turing Test, because that's what we're basically speaking about. This was a test put forward by Alan Turing, considered to be like the father of the modern computer. And the test he put forward is, if you were sitting in front of a terminal, that's as far as his imagination went back then, which is certainly far enough.
Yeah.
And you were chatting with somebody, and you couldn't tell if that person was a machine or not. Does that mean that that machine is now intelligent if in fact it wasn't a human? And this was the thought experiment he put forward, back 50 or 70 years ago, whenever it happened to be.
Yeah.
And so the notion is, if you're chatting with something and you can't tell the difference, well, is it at that point something intelligent?
Okay, that was not where I thought this conversation was going to go, because I want to think about that one. Because you start to get really philosophical about like human determinism and free will. Like, if you decide to walk outside in the next 5 minutes, even though we're recording this, like, you can make that decision, but is there something in your brain that made you decide to do that? And is that free will algorithmic based any different than the machine's algorithm, even though you could theoretically do things that are so abnormal that like a machine may not do them, but it's like, does a machine have to start doing things wrong on purpose to convince you that it's human?
Yeah, well, okay, so that we're
So
a
that's
little
what I
bit
said.
in left field now.
Okay, so maybe we'll come back to the idea of like free will. This comes up in philosophy classes a lot of times. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
just what is free will? That
Yeah.
like, as you kind of to explore that, and if your brain is just the result of all the inputs that you have received, and your perspective is different than any other individual, but in theory, if another person lived the exact same life as you, would they make the same decisions moving forward?
Yeah. Well, okay, I have to ask. So, where do you land on that, Aaron?
Uh, so this is probably comes to like, I still do think that there's some component of free will that is it's not like biologically, physically, chemically determined. I do still feel that there's something different between humans and machines from that perspective, and it would almost come down to like imagination, where I guess I have a belief that humans can imagine something outside of the realm that a machine could imagine.
Right.
And it's because I think that a machine at least it's still kind of dependent on the inputs. You need that medical doctor AI still has to read all the papers. I don't think the medical doctor AI could come up with modern medicine that has evolved over thousands of years, as we've learned about the human body.
Okay, so I guess a few things. From your I'm not a philosophy major, but I'm going to dig a little bit there. I believe that there was a distinction between the dualists, which was probably Descartes, right, who believed that there's two forms of things, things that are matter and things that are not matter, right, like the soul, right, and
Yeah.
and basically it's the things that makes humans different are we have that type of soul, right, that can do things outside of what is purely moved forward by the atoms that are inside the brain, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one camp, and then I think the other camp is this notion that no, we're just atoms, we're just a special configuration of atoms, but we're purely material in nature. There's nothing different from the atoms that make us up, and there's nothing else beyond that that's driving what we're doing. And I think that's like another camp, right? The materialistic
Kind of, yeah.
camp, right?
It'd be like Descartes is focused on like on the mind idea, like if you are yourself separate from your body,
Right.
that's again, it could be like a soul, could be a mind, could be the way the just ability to think. Whereas the other side is that like no, it's just the way your brain has been, all the inputs you've received over your lifetime. It's the same idea, yeah. So
Right.
those are the two camps, kind of.
Okay. And then where do you fall in on the two?
I would be more on the Descartes side, where I do, and this starts to, like, there's a large intersection with religion as well,
Right.
where and like admittedly, you start getting into, as you ponder these questions, like how much is a like self-preservation function, where you start to get into like, is it okay to eat cows? And if you're like, one of the ways that society for a long time has made that acceptable is you say, oh, they just don't have a mind, they don't have a soul, so they're just part of the atoms. And that's one of the differentiating factors between humans and other animals that we eat. And so that's why I kind of, sometimes you don't want to ask these questions of yourselves because you don't know the answer, kind of thing. Or at least acknowledging that there's might be some kind of bias there. Like maybe I haven't put the time and energy into like really thinking of which camp I would lie in, but I'm choosing to be in the one with the mind and the soul.
Right. Yeah, I think it's uncomfortable thinking that we could just be the collection of atoms, and
Yes.
therefore potentially deterministic, which may erode this notion of purpose.
Exactly. So, um, yeah, that's like maybe I don't want to have that conversation. Maybe I don't want to have that thought experiment. But I think that's probably why, like I've read science fiction novels that have, and I think that's one of like the things that impresses me is like there's the world building and being able to create new laws of physics. And so like I've seen both as a decent intersection between like quantum physicists and science fiction writers, because quantum physics talks to me like it's not guaranteed that another universe follows the same laws of physics in our universe. Like gravity could be different. It's easier to imagine another planet in our own universe where the beings living there breathe nitrogen and carbon instead of oxygen, because like our air is mostly nitrogen, so it's like easy to almost imagine that. And so like you start to extend the like, well, what else could be different? We can imagine that there's other organisms that don't have skeletons, they all have exoskeletons, because we've seen that in insects. We've seen cells and other organisms reproduce asexually, where you don't need partners. So like, one one conscious living humanoid creature who is self-aware just decide to create a second one? And it's these are things where like I don't know if a machine could get there. Like I'm not saying I can imagine all the other possibilities, but I think there's some human somewhere who can, where you start to just question the like nature, not saying the nature of reality, that's not quite what I'm saying, but it's like the the laws that humans take for granted, things like gravity, like what if that didn't exist? And like how would life happen? Like what if things like friction didn't exist? Which is like uh at a like atomic scale, there's some kind of bonding there, and at some small, like you can imagine like a bug sitting on the surface of water. Like we think of water as a fluid where you can go through it, but there is some surface tension, so it's possible to sit on the top of water if you understand the physics at a small enough scale. And so like I think humans can be imaginative in a way that that machines can't, but maybe they could. I don't know if they could get there. I don't know, like you. I don't know if they could, because like could they remove all of the inputs of the world that have like like it's that like the AIs understand it's like they are reading or observing so many things that have been created already, and then they're able to recreate something in that style. That's what allows them to pass the Turing test.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you remove some of those constraints, they might sound like an insane person and then fail the Turing test. Like I don't know. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, see, this is tricky because we may not be there quite yet, right? So it's hard to say. But yeah, I get it. So the high level notion is that humans have this notion of creativity and intuition that could probably, based upon what you're saying, would be very hard, if not impossible, for a computer to match.
I think it would be like an imagination of something that's not based on any current
Right.
observation.
Yeah, and
And
that
the
that's a
AI is entirely
distinction.
dependent on observations.
Right. Yeah. So here's one thing that kind of started shifting my mind in this direction, in a different direction. I remember reading this quote, which I tried looking for, I couldn't find it, but I read it when Kasparov was, playing Deep Blue and he had just got defeated, and he said something like, in one of the final games, he could feel it felt like another human there. He felt like his opponent was bringing to the table a deep type of intuition and creativity that he would only expect from a human. And it's this notion of coming up with something that we would never expect to do. And okay, so that's like a 1.0, right?
Okay, so because if I understand, like it with Kasparov, when his first loss, he resigned, and as they looked at it in the past, like the computer couldn't find a good move, and so it had a rule like if you can't find a good move, you just have to play a legal move, and it played a move that was so unexpected that Kasparov interpreted that as like this is not any sound chess strategy of up until now. The computer must be planning so many moves in advance that it can see something I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And he resigned. In fact, it was just no, the computer just played a legal move. It didn't have those 10 steps ahead. And so does that count as creativity? But in this, which I guess like if you're playing the game, like yes, you just have to make a legal move, and there was no like I almost wanted like to just go like left to right and like whatever piece I can move first. Like how to decide which piece was to make the random legal move. And I'm guessing it wasn't truly random. I'm sure there's some order operation inside that.
Right. So let's hold that in our mind as like a very basic case. And now let's
Okay.
fast forward more than 20 years,
Yeah.
right?
I think we're
And
30 or 40 years now.
right, yeah. So now you can tell it to do things like, make a compelling Christmas dinner. But beyond
Okay.
that, I've seen it. What I did is I then opened up one of these chat windows and I said, I picked a topic like that always gets confusing if you try to Google for it. How to properly do a Roth conversion or a backdoor Roth, something like
Okay.
that. And I said, give me a few paragraphs on how to pull this off. And it did, it spit it out in real time. And what it was saying was quite sensible advice. And it was written in a way that I thought was correct. So then I'm like, okay, this is a little better than I was expecting. And I started asking a bunch of other things. And then it just got me thinking, well, okay, so if you can ask it things like this, where that's quite hard to ascertain based upon information that is readily available, and it does a pretty good job, where does this go from there? And then, I just started looking around for other examples and trying to see where are the limits, currently. And it surprised me because this type of technology is being used in a lot of other different spaces as well. For example, you can ask it to write, research reports and book reports and stuff like that, and it can do that. And obviously, it can do it from the standard stuff that everybody else might be putting together, but you can throw it a curveball and say, write it from the standpoint of someone living in the 18th century, right? Something like that, and it'll make those modifications. And then, the next phase that I saw is there's different versions of the AI that are being used to create music and artwork. And, this is well in the area of creativity and that notion of imagination, where if you have a ton of artwork that's spit out by the computer and it looks very similar in terms of caliber to what we might expect for a human in this realm, that's what we think is largely driven by imagination, and we can't tell the difference. For this type of Turing test, where do we stand today?
So I guess um so I remember, like, I've also seen, like, someone described a painting, and they, like, there was a critical response to it, and they had an AI recreate the painting, and it was kind of a joke of, like, it looked like a cave drawing. Basically, it was, like, so simplistic and so old, and all of the new artwork it fit that description well, but, like, it didn't fit the original item well. um but that was a good point. Like, it was able to recreate a series of artworks that fit a description fairly well. And so my next thing is, like, well, it still requires the input. It still requires the description. And so maybe you can tell a machine to create art, and maybe it can produce a random piece of art. But I think it would, like, think about, like, the Turing test is, like, does that machine want to create art? And I think I don't know if like, if it can decide to not create art because it doesn't want to, or if the writing bot wants to paint. Like, I don't know how, like, to like, kind of describe that distinction, but, like, it's trying to speak to that idea of, as of right now, it's still based on the inputs, and could it get to a level where the the doctor AI wants to learn how to write music?
So I think that there is a distinction between intelligence, right, and imagination
Yeah.
versus human intelligence and human imagination. For example, the way that humans go about things, we bring our own biology into the mix because, for example, we care about eating, right? Does a machine care
That's yeah.
about,
Yeah.
right?
That's,
That needs to be programmed in.
yeah.
We care about our ego and preserving that, right? Because it's important in a society as a human to care about those types of things.
Yeah.
Does a machine, is that programmed into? No. Does the machine care about being turned off? No. Humans, yes, we do, right? But these are human versions of the intelligence and human versions of these types of emotional issues. They're not necessarily innate to intelligence, right? Or innate to imagination. They're more innate to human intelligence and human imagination. So it's safe in my mind that you could have imagination that surpasses human imagination, but yeah, it doesn't care about the things that humans care about.
Okay. So it feels like you're saying like the Turing test is too simplistic.
It is. This
It's
is 70
yeah, well, yeah, yeah.
years
But
ago.
it's the idea like if a machine can pass the Turing test,
Yeah.
you could call it intelligent, but not. But that doesn't make it alive.
Well, okay, so yeah, here's the distinction, right? If it passes the Turing test, we can say it might have imagination and it might have creativity, it might have intelligence, but that doesn't mean it's human, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a distinction.
So it's like it's probably not self-aware. Like that might be a differentiating factor.
Yeah. So see, the way I kind of see it is the reason humans care about human intelligence and human forms of creativity and imagination is because we're human, right? It's been programmed in us to care about
It's
those
like
things.
you said, like all the like the biology, the like dopamine in your brain, like happiness, the ego is like tribal, it's part of survival. And so if the machine is not concerned about survival, it's not concerned about emotions and dependent on others for survival. Yeah, like there's enough differences there. A machine doesn't have to be happy.
Right.
It's so yeah. So
like the original Turing test, I think the notion was if you couldn't tell it from a human, then it must be intelligent. But it never occurred to us that there's this form of intelligence outside of humans, right?
yeah,
Because we
yeah,
were the only intelligent things, of course,
yeah.
in our own universe. But there is a notion of intelligence that can potentially exist without humans.
Okay, so I feel like that's like a cheating answer. It's like, uh, we don't have to choose the soul or atoms. Kind of going back to the original, it's uh, like we're defined. Oh, it's intelligent, but it's never trying to be human, and like we're not trying to recreate another human via machine. Like it feels like a little bit of a cop out, but it's probably more accurate anyways.
Well, see, I think the notion is humans the highest bar? Are humans the highest bar for intelligence?
Oh, interesting.
Well, according to us, sure, but according to somebody who, our species 10,000 years from now, we're cavemen, right?
Yeah. That yeah, so it's like it sounds like um the science fiction writers be like when you can communicate telepathically or uh you can use your mind in a ways that current physics don't allow. Something like that. Like that might be a higher level of intelligence we can imagine, but like I don't think those are realistic. I get from my understanding of the laws of physics and like starting to get like, is ESP possible? So I don't know. Like that's a good question. Can humans even imagine a higher level of intelligence?
Well, I
that
think
is like physical. That's like physically possible. Like I'd say possible under the laws of physics in our universe.
I think it's quite possible. For example, humans are very bad at memorizing a phone book. A computer can do that far more easily and use that information far more readily, right? That's one small example, but there's so many things. Computers can see better than us. They can, computate things better than us, and then, form these creative gaps. I think the writing's on the wall for that as well. And sure, ESP computers can all talk to each other in real time, right? No big deal. Don't need to move their lips.
That's it. Okay. So I feel like we almost need to have like a follow-up conversation, because one of the things you mentioned was using this AI to write book reports.
Right.
And that's where I thought the conversation was going, because like I was trying to defend people and their honor and saying like the people who are going to cheat using AI were the ones who were already figuring out other ways to cheat in the past, but it becomes more about the learning and process. But like I feel like that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, this definitely went in a quite different direction. We didn't quite touch on any of that.
So I guess also, do you have any thoughts on those two camps of like determinism versus mind and soul?
I think I was in the more deterministic camp. My outlook has softened for different reasons, than what one might think. But originally, when I first learned about, or when I first had this conversation, back in undergrad, probably about determinism, soul, dualism, and all that, it just kind of made sense to me that the actions that I take today are a function of my history and my pre-programmed genes, up until this point. And, the thought experiment I kind of had at the time was, okay, let's say you take a copy of me, exactly. You take a copy of this whole universe, 2 copies, and you let them run forward. If they're the exact same copy, meaning the same particles, the same, experiences, then why would me in this universe make any decision that's different from me in this universe?
And I think there's a little bit of like chaos theory involved in there, a little bit of like the probabilistic nature that a lot of people kind of have trouble comprehending. But like, yes, you would have made this decision 99 times out of 100, but enough of the decisions like 60-40 decisions, 70-30 decisions. And I don't know that if it's the exact same universe and same exact way that you were brought up, same genes, same biology, I don't think that necessarily implies that the decision is exactly the same. And then you only need like one different decision.
So where does that one different decision get made if the entire set of atoms and every particle is exactly the same in both universes? Now I'll provide a little bit of an answer to that, because we know in for example, quantum physics, that you set up the same experiment and it's not deterministic on what the outcome is. That's kind of the premise, right?
Yeah.
The outcome is unknown, but the distribution of outcomes can be predicted.
Yes, I was actually thinking like just the roll of the dice idea. It's that I think there's enough of that true randomness in the universe,
right?
That one of those was a roll of the dice situations or a coin flip situation, and even if it's like a heavily weighted coin, like I think that's probably the best way to phrase it. Like the quantum physics I think are going to be something's going to be slightly different. And I think there's enough, like it's not like vastly different, but it's enough of like trees that kind of grow this way. And so I do think that if the physics of the universe was exactly the same, even if your brain is exactly the same, one of those decisions along the way would have been different.
Right. I mean, this goes into a completely other area. So who knows if this is a different conversation, but just a little bit further, just for the, where I landed on this. Yes. Okay. So then I told myself, I got to the understanding that, things aren't always purely deterministic, because we don't live in a fully deterministic world because of this quantum nature of reality. Right.
Yeah.
But then I started thinking, well, okay, but then it's the quantum fluctuations that are making the differences. Is that free will?
That's interesting. That's a fair question. That if you're the result of all of the external inputs and it's a quantum fluctuation that changes the external input.
I don't control quantum fluctuation.
Yeah. That's I feel like that's a better question, but that's also like just the philosophers have been going on for a long time of like what's the smallest thing. And I think that's probably I don't know how to phrase it, but like I don't. My guess is that there isn't a smallest thing. And I don't know what that means.
So here's where I kind of landed. So the next step beyond, when I came across the understanding that the universe isn't deterministic, I didn't jump to the other side of the fence, because I still couldn't quite get around the fact that, well, then there might be something beyond what exactly is there in terms of the atoms, right? A soul, right?
Yeah.
That was hard for me to bridge, because I thought, well, what's it made of? It's not made of atoms. Okay, when does it appear? Does it appear when the atoms form a certain way, or is it just everywhere and the brain sucks it up? All those types of things. Couldn't quite get past that. So I still maintained the notion that.
So now you're asking, like, does a soul have mass?
Well, yeah, right. If it has mass, what's it made of? If it's not atoms, right? Things like that. So I landed still closer in the fact that we are just made of material things. Even though it's not fully deterministic, I still felt like, well, we don't exactly control that indeterminism, right? So that kind of left me in the more materialist camp, right?
Yeah.
But then I started thinking of this third notion, and I think what philosophers call this is a compatibilist notion, meaning you can still have a world that's highly material and that's driven by this indeterminism that we don't quite control. And this notion of free will from an outside source may not show up. However, we as humans can still have this sense of free will nevertheless, because the universe is so predictable. Even if we knew exactly where everything was and we could, somehow make these predictions, there would still be this indeterminism, meaning we still don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So it could be just this illusion that helps give us purpose, that's helpful to
I guess that's the not exactly a cop out, but it's like acknowledging like it doesn't matter what the answer is. It's not going to change how humans live their life or how the universe like works and operates. And so that's one of those, like, it might be like a Nietzsche nihilism thing. I'm not quite sure about that, but like that I like the two camps. The answer is like it doesn't matter.
Kind of, sort of. That's kind of it. The notion is even if it is fully deterministic, things are so complicated that we will never be able to predict it. And it's the fact that we can't predict it that leaves us with the understanding that, or it leaves us with the feeling of free will that's worth digging into or believing.
Okay, so we should probably wrap up, but I definitely think we're gonna like continue this next time.
I think we might need to because the whole we weren't even supposed to talk about this today, but I don't think we even did in terms of what we set out to cover.
No, it's we got a lot more on practical implications of ChatGPT and AI.
Right.
So
okay.
I think we'll talk about that next time.
That sounds good. These are interesting conversations, but I think there are some points here on how this ties back to, what are the implications, or, what's the what of all this?
We need a little bit of philosophy 101 to be able to discuss job prospects in the future.
All right, good deal, Aaron. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for coming on this a little whimsical journey with us. We'll probably end up being more practical next time, but I hope you enjoyed. No promises either. All right, thanks everybody for listening. Please share, like, upvote, and subscribe. All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and has no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.